Well, hello there, and welcome to AP Microeconomics. We're going to get started today with our very first section, our very first module. Let me just for a moment just talk for a quick second about how the PowerPoints and such, how these sections are organized, how this is how your textbook does it. This book right here, Krugman's Economics for AP. You'll notice that typically, in history, it's always chapter whatever and section whatever. This book divides things into not chapters, but what are called sections. And then the individual, what I think typically you might call a section, are called modules. So saying section one, module one is kind of like saying chapter one, section one. So just be aware they use a little bit of a different terminology, and I like to use the same technology in my PowerPoints and videos so that you can easily refer to that same information in the textbook if you're ever using it or ever want to. The only thing that's a little bit annoying about it, I will admit, is that the module numbers do not start over whenever you go into a new section. So you eventually get up into module 18, 19, 20. I believe it goes all the way up to 40 or something. So just be aware of that as that happens. But like I said, I like for it to be organized the same way so you can easily find things. This first module and this first section, as you can see, is called Basic Economic Concepts. So we are just getting the basics for econ in general, and then we'll be focusing specifically on some of the topics that relate more to microeconomics specifically, and you're going to learn in this section what the difference is between microeconomics and what we call macroeconomics. You'll get that in a moment. We'll be looking more specifically at those things as we move along. But the purpose of this first module is a lot of just basic introductory information, a lot of vocabulary here, a lot of just learning some terminology and learning what economics is all about, because this is a class that people really, I think, more than certainly any of the other social studies, really don't have very much of a concept about what economics is. We hear that word all the time, we use that word all the time, and yet struggle to define exactly what it is. And there are great misconceptions, I think, about exactly what economics is and what economics isn't. So we will hopefully clear up a lot of those things in this section today. So like I said, lots of vocab, lots of basic definitional kind of stuff in here, and just kind of learning the ropes of economic terminology and what economists do, and a little bit about what we'll be doing as we move forward from here. So then, if you would please take a moment, and you may even want to pause the video here for a second, and take a look at this Calvin and Hobbes cartoon. And take a look at this interaction between Calvin and his dad. And then let me go over a couple of things with you, and I'll tell you how this illustrates some basic principles of economics. So pause the video for a second, take a look at this, and then start playing again after just a moment. So what you'll notice here is this interaction between Calvin and his dad. Calvin is demanding something. Ultimately, he decides to take less than what he was originally asking for, but ultimately decides that something is better than nothing. He makes a decision. He weighs the benefit, he weighs the cost, and he makes a decision. Maybe not the decision, doesn't arrive at the conclusion that he originally wanted, but it's a decision-making process, and it was about weighing costs and benefits. That's what economics is. That is the question, the model that is at the crux of everything that we will do is that choice. So that brings us to, again, how we can define economics and what it means. Economics is, by definition, it is simply the study of how individuals, how people, how groups, how anyone or anything, how we make decisions about how we allocate scarce resources, amongst unlimited wants. How do we allocate resources under conditions of scarcity? How do we make decisions about what we're going to consume, when we're going to consume, who's going to get what? How do we make any kind of decision at all about what we want and what we need under conditions of scarcity? Because there's not enough of everything to go around. There's not enough resources to go around. We can't have everything that we want, and so we have to make decisions about what it is we're going to do and how we're going to spend our money, how we're going to spend our time, because we only have so much of it, and we cannot satisfy everything that we want and need. The study of that is what economics is at its most basic level. It involves individuals making choices, and this is why or a point of confusion here is people want to think that economics is all about money, that it's a study of money and finance and all those kind of things. Those choices may have to do with money and finance, but they might not. We could be talking about, yes, you're making a decision about how to spend the $100 that you have. But we could also be, talking about making a decision about how you're going to spend your time. You've got 1 hour. How are you going to allocate that 1 hour? Are you going to study that 1 hour? Are you going to study all your subjects? Are you going to rest? Are you going to play around on your phone? That is economics. So economics is everywhere. It's in our everyday lives all of the times. But we have to understand, or what we try to do in economics is to understand how and why we make those choices and how those choices interact. And this is why economics is not a business course. That's why this falls under the realm of the social studies, because it is a study of choices, and therefore it is a study of people. It's a study of behavior and people, the same way that history is. So that's what makes it a social science, as opposed to more about business or finance or accounting or something like that. Now, we also can't confuse economics with the economy, and economics is not necessarily the study of the economy, whereas economics is the study of those choices and how we make those choices. An economy is a system that provides or that coordinates those choices. That is what an economy does. It is a system that kind of provides a framework for how those choices might be made. It makes those decisions about how we're going to allocate those resources. Perhaps they're making those decisions about who's going to produce what, how much they're going to produce, who's going to get it, and all those kind of things. That is what an economy does. It's a system that coordinates those choices. Now, we keep talking about the words choices. So we want to talk a little bit about individual choice and some of the guiding principles that economists just sort of operate under when it comes to the study of individual choice. Some of these are just some of the basic underlying assumptions that we have to start kind of realizing in order to think like economists. One is that resources are scarce. Everything is scarce. Things might be abundant, but there's only a limited supply. There's a limited supply of land. There's a limited supply of time. There's a limited supply of air. There's a limited supply of any kind of capital, of machinery, any sorts of resources, those factors of production that we're going to talk about in a second. They are scarce. And the real cost of something, this is where, again, we want to think economics is all about money. Well, it's partially about money. But the real cost of something is what you have to give up to get it. Not just the $5 that you had to pay to get this meal. It's what else you could have bought with that $5. You could have bought something else. You could have gone and done something else instead of buying that meal. So it's not just the $5 that cost you. It is all those other things that you gave up besides the $5. All those other things that could have been done with it that you give up. So we have to think beyond money. If we think just in terms of money when it comes to economics, we're thinking way, way, way too small. So we have to think in terms of what other things had to be given up. And that has a name. We'll talk about that in just a second. We also have to operate under the notion that people typically act in their own self-interest, that we take advantage of opportunities to make ourselves better off. Now, whether or not, sounds like you're saying everybody's selfish, everybody just does what's best for them. Well, that's true. That doesn't necessarily mean that you would harm someone else, but we do things that are in our own self-interest. We do things that are going to make us better off. Even if it's doing something nice for somebody else, there's value in that for us, whether that's just making us feel good or using that as collateral later on when you need a favor or something like that. But we operate under these basic principles that resources are scarce. There's not enough of everything to go around, and there never will be. That the real cost of something involves so much more than money, and that people are going to behave in self-interested ways. That shouldn't be misunderstood, that people are automatically cruel or something or evil, but that we act in our own self-interest. Now, talking about economy, we just need to kind of understand some basic differences, basic characteristics about different kinds of economies, even though our study is not so much of the economy, but of economics. There are kind of two major types of economies, and then there's plenty that fall in between. This is kind of a spectrum thing. So think of it as kind of not you are either one or the other, but it's kind of a spectrum. One end of that spectrum being a market economy. And this is like the United States. The United States is more like a market economy. And in a market economy, those decisions that an economy makes about what to produce and who's going to produce it and all those kind of things. In a market economy, those decisions are made by individuals. They are not made by a central authority like a government. So, I choose to go into business for myself because that's what I want to do. I make that choice as an individual, not because the government told me to. This company is going to make this many cars this year and employ this many people because that's their decision to do it, not because the government commanded it. So those are economies where, there are incentives. We'll talk about that in just a second. But there is no centralized authority making those decisions. Those decisions are in the hands of individuals, businesses, private ownership, all those kinds of things. The other end of that spectrum is what you would call a command economy. And I know what you all are thinking, communist governments tend to have command economies, but that's not necessarily the defining characteristic of either one of those things. But a command economy is one in which those decisions about what to produce, when to produce it, how much, who gets it, how it's distributed, all that kind of stuff is made by some kind of central authority, whether that be a government or an economic council or something like that. So that is where those decisions are not made by individuals, but by some sort of central authority. Now, again, you're not necessarily one or the other. There is something in between. The United States is not a pure and total market economy because the government does have a hand in it. There are regulations. There are, instances in which the government might intervene and, whether by subsidizing companies or we know historically there have been examples where they took a more hands-on role in telling businesses what to produce. That is kind of rare in our country, but we are somewhere in between that, but certainly leaning way more toward the market economy side. There is some government intervention. Let's talk about obviously the big difference is who controls it, but another big difference between a market economy and a command economy are incentives. Incentives are simply the rewards and the punishments. You're incentivized to produce something if you're going to get some kind of reward from it, profit, notoriety, money, that kind of thing. And that is that incentive that drives a market economy because this goes back to people being self-interested. This goes back to people doing things that are going to make them better off. We are incentivized in that market economy to make certain economic decisions because of those rewards or to avoid punishments. Those are those incentives. And again, this is one of the ways that a market economy really differs from one that is a command economy, because a command economy oftentimes lacks those incentives because command economy oftentimes lack property rights, private property. The concept of property create those incentives. The idea that this invention that I made, this business that I own is my property and therefore I get to benefit from it. I get to reap the rewards, the incentive from it. That is what drives that innovation. That is a big critique, among other things, of a command economy is because you don't have those incentives and therefore people are not as encouraged to innovate. Why should I spend my time and my money and my talents inventing this new technique for such and such if I'm not going to get any benefits from it? If the government, a command economy system, is just going to take that from me. So again, that's a huge critique and a big difference between the two different types of economy, market and command. So in market economy, private ownership, individual ownership, incentives, private property rights, things that protect my property, my inventions, my intellectual property, all those kind of things, and provide that incentive that make it valuable, that really put value in that. Now here is a big concept that again is at the very, very crux of what we do. Like I've already said, economics is the study of how individuals make decisions, how we make decisions about how we're going to allocate, limited resources amongst unlimited wants. Those decisions are what we call marginal decisions. Marginal is a word you're going to hear a lot in this class. And in this case, marginal always means additional, okay? Additional. We make decisions about should we produce one more thing, an additional unit, a marginal unit. Are we going to get additional benefit or marginal benefit? So marginal decisions are what we most likely are going to call marginal analysis. Is at the crux of everything that we do. Let me further define that a little bit. What we're weighing in those marginal decisions is the marginal benefit. That means additional benefit, okay? The additional benefit, the additional gain, the additional satisfaction, perhaps additional money. Again, we can't always be thinking in terms of money, but that is the additional benefit that I would get from buying another pair of shoes. That wouldn't just be the miles I'm going to walk in them. It's the satisfaction that gives me, that additional benefit or satisfaction. That's my marginal benefit. I'm going to weigh that against my marginal cost. That means the additional cost. And cost, remember, when we're thinking in economic terms, we got to get out of money. That's not just the price. That does not mean price. Cost never means price, or almost never means price. When we're talking about economics, it means not only the price, but also the opportunity cost. So going back to the shoe example, I'm going to weigh the additional satisfaction that I'm going to get out of purchasing those shoes versus the additional cost. Not just the $50 that it cost me, but what else could I have bought with that $50? What else could I have done with that time that I took to go to the shoe store or shop online and find them? That is that thing you're wrestling with. That is that decision that you're making. It's marginal benefit versus marginal cost. That is so much of what we do in this class, is weighing marginal benefit over marginal cost. And sometimes, well, eventually those words, marginal benefit and marginal cost, will kind of take on some different names, but it's always the same kind of thing. We just look at it kind of with some different terminology. And that decision-making process is marginal analysis. When we look at all of that, when we figure out exactly what, it can actually put numbers even on what that marginal benefit is versus what that marginal cost is, that whole process is marginal analysis. We will actually start doing that here in this first section, and then we do that a lot. We just, like I said, the scenarios change, the terminology changes, but the basic skill of marginal analysis does not. So it is a crucial thing to learn, and again, we are constantly weighing those benefits and those costs. Now, going back to the point of resources, we talked about how economics is the study of how we allocate scarce resources against or amongst unlimited ones. So let's talk about what we mean when we talk about resources. And a lot of this stuff is going to come back toward the later part of the class when we start talking about something called factor markets. And those factor markets are going to have to do with these factors of production. So a resource, is anything that we are using to produce something else. A resource is anything we are using to produce something else. Sometimes we call those resources factors of production. And you can probably think of what some of these things are. They're illustrated in this picture, which I'm kind of covering up at the moment. And we can divide those factors of production into 4 different categories. So we're going to talk about what those are and talk about a few examples of those categories. So the first factor of production is land. Okay, that's not just the land, like the ground, where I might build a factory or something like that, or farm some crops. That is anything coming from nature. So it's the land itself, it is the trees, it is the water, it is anything like that. Anything that occurs from nature counts as land. Land, of course, is limited. There's only so much of it. Then there's capital. Capital in this case means things like machinery. It means vehicles. It means computers. It means any kind of tools. Think of capital as the stuff that makes the stuff. Things that are usually man-made, don't come from nature, because that would be land. Anything there would be capital. So if I have a factory, the land, of course, is what it's sitting on, but all of that other infrastructure that we built, that is capital. Then there's something called entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is the one we'll spend the least amount of time on. Entrepreneurship, really, I wish I would put it last. It is the innovation. It is the people that figure out how to use all of these factors of production to create something or to produce something. And that is, again, where the incentives come in, people that are going to use that innovativeness to create something and profit from it. Then there is labor. Labor, of course, is the work. That is the human effort that goes into production, whether that is a factory worker or a doctor or a nurse or a teacher or a scientist or the gas station employee, anything like that, that of course falls under labor. Later in the class, we will, like I said, look at those factor markets. We will look at the market for land and the market for capital and the market for labor and those kind of things, everything but entrepreneurship. Now, a very, very important concept, hugely important in economics, absolutely crucial. And we've already kind of hit on this. Then we're going to actually put a name on it, and that's opportunity cost. We said that everything has a cost, and cost does not mean price. That when you consume something, use something, buy something, it's not just costing you the actual cash value, not just the money, not just the price, but it's also what you gave up. Is everything that you gave up besides just money, your time, what else you could have done with that money, That is opportunity cost. It is the value of what else was given up. It was the value of the next best alternative. And when we talk about cost, it just needs to be understood in economics that you're always talking about opportunity cost. Economic cost means opportunity cost. And again, that is so crucial, and we have to consider that every time we do something. And you can think of, your opportunity costs of just about anything. Your opportunity costs of sitting here and watching this video are all the other things that you might be doing instead, whether that's sleeping or watching television. That's what you gave up in order to be here. So everything has a cost, not just stuff that you dole out cash for or you whip out your credit card for or whatever. Everything has a cost because everything has an opportunity cost. And that's one of those things that's at the crux of economics. Let me talk for a few minutes about the different branches of economics. And we'll kind of, because some of you may be wondering why in the world is it called microeconomics? What's different about that? There are two different fields, two different branches of economics. There is micro and there is macro. We will be dealing solely with microeconomics. Micro, as you can probably guess, means small. So microeconomics is the study of individual people, individual households, individual businesses or firms, and how they make those decisions about what to produce, how much to produce, what to consume, how they make decisions about allocating those resources in conditions of scarcity. So it's a microcosm. It's a small bit. It's a small piece of the economy. It is studying that little portion of it, one household, one individual, and all that at a time. Macroeconomics studies the whole thing. Macroeconomics is the study of the whole economy. So that one where you're more looking at the bigger picture. So microeconomics is the small picture. Macroeconomics is the bigger picture. Macroeconomics deals in what's called economic aggregates. Economic aggregates are measures that summarize data across multiple markets, multiple industries, those kind of things. And those aggregates are measured by things that you probably have heard of, things like GDP, which means gross domestic product, unemployment, inflation, all those kind of things are measured by economic aggregates. But all that is macroeconomics, so we won't be dealing with that. We'll be sticking to the micro stuff. This little chart here kind of shows you some differences. So a macroeconomics question is something like what determines the cost of a university offering a new course, one university offering one new course, whereas if you're talking about overall college tuition levels in the economy as a whole, that would be more of a microeconomics kind of a question. So other branches of economics and some things we want to clarify about how they are different. There's what we call positive economics and there's what we call normative economics. Positive economics means that you are describing things as is. And at positive economics, we are studying the economy as it is, as things exist, not making judgment calls about how it ought to be. That is normative economics. Normative economics is where you are looking at the economy as you want it to be, as it should be. So positive economics is descriptive. It's describing how it is. Normative economics is looking at prescription. What should we do to change this? Not just positive would be like inflation is at 6%. I made that up. And normative economics is we should be, decreasing the interest rate or raising the interest rate or whatever in order to make the interest rate 5% or something like that. So positive, and we stick to positive. Positive economics, we are just describing how it is, not how it ought to be, and avoiding those discussions about what things, what the government ought to be doing and things like that. So we won't be looking at those kind of questions, but more just how is it. Lastly here, going back to this economic way of thinking, and this part, if you're taking notes here, you don't necessarily need to take notes on this particular slide. And I'm just going to go ahead and put all of this stuff up here and just talk about it. This is, again, just getting us a baseline for how we need to start thinking and how to think like an economist. So first of all, basic principle of economics is that everything has a cost. This, in parentheses here, what looks like Tenfestall, that is sort of economic trope, I guess. It's a concept that stands for there is no such thing as free lunch. That's what those letters stand for right there. There's no such thing as free lunch. It is this principle that economists operate under that, like I said, everything has a cost. There's always an opportunity cost. Even if it's free to you, like nothing's really free. So if somebody's going around handing out free sandwiches, that still has a cost. Even though you may not have doled out money for it, you're going to eat that instead of something else. You're going to take time to eat that instead of something else. It costs somebody something. So there's always a cost. People make choices for good reasons. This is going back to what I was saying about people being ultimately self-interested. That doesn't mean selfish, cruel, hateful, evil, heartless. It just means that we act in our own best interest. Incentives matter. We are going to make decisions, based on what we're going to get out of it, and that is at the crux of all economic decision making. People create economic systems to influence choices and incentives. It's about coordinating that, and that's why we have an economic system to influence and to maintain those kinds of things. People gain from voluntary trade. We engage in transactions and trade with each other because it benefits us in some way. We're going to look at that a little bit later in this section. Economic thinking is marginal thinking. We are always thinking on the margin. We are constantly, and most of what we are going to do here will be looking at, okay, what happens if we produce one more unit? What happens if where's the most profitable place to be? If we produce another one, is that going to be profitable? All that kind of thing. The value of a good or service is affected by people's choices. Things are not valuable just because. They have value because of the choices that we're making. Gold, for example, it's not valuable just because. It is valuable because of the choices we make to make it valuable, if that makes sense. We put that value on it. And the choices that people make and the way that they interact with it can change the value of it. That will make more sense when we talk about supply and demand. Economic actions create secondary effects. Things that we do will ripple across the economy in multiple ways. So everything has a cost, everything has a major effect. And again, these are things that will make more sense to you, I think, when we get a little bit more into the class. So while, and I hope most of you are not disappointed by the idea that this is not about business, this is not about finance, this is not about critiquing the economy and rescuing the economy and all that sort of stuff. This is about decision making. And this is where this class will change you. This class will make you a different kind of decision maker and perhaps a better decision maker, which is why everybody can benefit from it, even if you're not going to go study economics later on, or you're not going to go into business or finance. This will really change the way that you approach decision making and potentially make you a better decision maker. So I hope you're going to enjoy it. I do. And we will start looking at some of those basic economic concepts in action in our next time together. So for now, I will sign off and we'll see you next time.